So I got to tell you, as the aeronautics director for Colorado, I've got the best job on the planet. 1973, old war airport. Yeah, so anyway, that was the first air show. That was in the Mama Black Sheep TV show days. And he had a Corsair there that somebody had brought. But anyway, that's the day I think that I became, I love this picture because this day I decided I wasn't. Anyway, that's a great picture. I also understood from Brian that there were some other pictures out there on that abandoned airport website, which is really a cool website. If you've ever seen that one, it's really neat. You can go back. It's called Abandoned and Little Known Airfields. And it's a guy named Bill Freeman that has put together thousands of stories about airports that don't exist anymore. And he's got the opportunity for you to add pictures to it. And I've added several pictures of airports in Colorado and Utah. But that one is one that you were laughing about, Brian. So this is me in 1995 at the Tower of State. Oh, sorry, freshly painted X on 8 left there. But anyway, a good friend of mine worked for the city and county of Denver at the time. And we got to go all over that airport. There's not a single person in there. It was so bizarre because every flight board, this one here at Gate Bravo 5, I think it says Las Vegas, had every last destination was still plugged in there. It was so eerie. It was just like right out of a Stephen King movie or something. Drove my little Dodge Shadow at the time, but drove it out on the runway out there. Everything is still in place. Just like, I mean, even the jet bridges, this was 2 days after it closed. So anyway, there's your pictures, Brian. I told you that I'd share, but that's hard to believe. That's been 27, almost 27 years ago now. It's pretty crazy. So anyway, let's talk more about what the division does. That's my aviation history. I love airplanes. I'm just so lucky to get to do what I do for Colorado. So anyway, our little division of aeronautics is part of CDOT. There's 8 of us that don't do surface transportation out of 3,300 people that work for CDOT. 8 of us, soon to be 9. We're going to add another position I'll talk about. But anyway, that's our mission. We support the whole statewide multimodal transportation system by supporting airports and aviation. So, and our vision is to continue to do that and make sure that airports continue to be economic drivers and play key parts of that. I will point out that all of these photos that you see were all taken by our communications manager, Sean Sederberg. I think some of you may know Sean. He does some fantastic work. It's an aerial photo there over Cheeseman Reservoir, pretty cool. But we're different. Even though we're part of CDOT, we're governed and managed completely separately. I don't actually report to the CDOT director. Our division is accountable to the 7-member Colorado Aeronautical Board. And under state law, it's the highest authority board that exists. It's called a Type 1 board. They have budgetary authority. They have hiring and firing authority. And if we want to do something at the division with our money, that's the only group we have to go to get approval. I don't have to go to the state legislature. I don't have to go to the CDOT BS. When Governor Roy Romer, who was a very active GA pilot, and Senator Lou Enns created the legislation that made our division happen back in the late 80s, they structured us so well that allows us to be really, really innovative and really efficient. So these are the 7 board members that we have today. They're appointed to 3-year terms. Governor Polis has kind of continued the tradition of the previous governors of 2 consecutive terms for all the boards, not just for ours. But our board in particular is made up of people from specific constituencies. So we have 2 that come from the Eastern Plains. That's Continental Divide or Front Range West, roughly. Right now, that's Charles Myers. He's on the Airport Advisory Board at Colorado Springs, former Army aviator, flew bird dogs in Vietnam, and he owns a company that manages Part 135 charter aircraft down in the Springs. Chaz Tedesco is our other Eastern Plains representative. He's new to the board. He replaced Amy Miller, who moved out of state a little bit earlier this year. He's an Adams County commissioner and very vested in the Colorado Air and Spaceport out there where our office is. Our 2 Western Slope members, Kenny Mampa is our chair right now. Kenny is the airport director in Telluride, used to be the airport director at this airport for about 10 years in a previous life. So he knows aviation very, very well. And then Kent Holsinger is a very active GA pilot and a natural resources attorney based out of Walden. A couple of years ago, Kent's claim to fame, I think he flies a Lancer 4 he set for his class of aircraft the current speed record between North America's highest airport and North America's lowest airport. So the joke was that was easy, we're going downhill, but he flew from Leadville to Death Valley in like 2 hours and 20 minutes or something crazy like that. It was pretty amazing. So really active GA guy. George Merritt up at the top is our current airport manager representative. He is a senior vice president of operations at Denver International. You guys might all recognize the dude with the cool mustache down below, Mark Van Tine, former CEO of Jeppesen, is new on our board. He's our at-large member, just a fantastic guy. And then pilot associations, I know you've all seen Trimby on your calls. Trimby Zabo is our pilot rep, past president of Women in Aviation International Chapter, and a CFI here at Rocky Mountain Metro. She flies over at Western, I think. Yeah, Western, thank you. Yep, cool. And this is amazing. She just learned to fly like 5 years ago. She's late in life, change of career, and she just got hired on with SkyWest. So it's kind of cool. She's going to go be an airline pilot, which is awesome. So that's our airport system. You all know this. You've been everywhere, more so than anybody else I ever get to talk to. 76 public use airports in Colorado. 14 of those have commercial service. We do have 2 seaplane bases. Any seaplane rated pilots in here? Jeff is, I know a lot of them. So we have 2, one in Lake Meredith down here by La Junta, and then one up at Kenny Reservoir right on short final for the runway up at Rangeley. Always get asked, yes, there is a state prohibition against operating seaplanes on state-owned waters, but that doesn't extend to privately owned reservoirs. Those are both owned by irrigation companies. So that's why you're allowed to operate seaplanes there, but still can't do it on Cherry Creek or Chatfield or, or any of those kinds of things. But anyway, those are charted on there. One thing that's really interesting, and Gary talked a little bit about all that federal money that came to the state through all the stimulus programs. None of that came directly to our division. Most of that went directly to airports. The challenge we have in Colorado is that of the 76 public use airports we have, only 49 are eligible for federal money. So all of that federal money only went to 49. Airports like Creed, some of those other airports are not in the federal system. They rely just on us to help keep their airports running. The other thing that was really interesting, of all of the CARES money that came through earlier last year and a half, $704 million. GA airports got 0.6% of that, only about $4 million. It was very heavily focused on commercial service airports. Denver got 80% of that. So we're going to wait and see how the infrastructure bill that just got passed yesterday, it's going to get signed next week. It's got $432 million coming to airports in Colorado, give or take, depending on how the formulas work out. But once again, we expect that those are all heavily weighted. As Walt knows, FAA formulas tend to favor commercial service airports. It's really amazing to me. I always love it. Centennial Airport's one of the busiest airports in the country. They get exactly the same amount of FAA money every year as Springfield does, $150,000. That's it. So here's our system. When we do our state aviation system plan, we don't look at all 76 public use airports. 10 of those are privately owned, even though they're open to the public. State law does not allow us to do any funding or any work at privately owned airports because they're privately owned. The only exception to that is Meadow Lake. Interestingly enough, Meadow Lake's a little bit of a unicorn. It is a federal airport. It is privately owned because it's a designated reliever for Colorado Springs. That is the one under the way our state statute is structured, we're allowed to fund Meadow Lake. So anyway, that's how it's broken down. We have 53 airports with weather, 57 offering fuel. As I mentioned, 49 are in the federal airport system plan and eligible for FAA money. And then we have 9 with air traffic control towers. That's actually 10 if you count the project we're doing at Northern Colorado Regional. I'll talk a little bit about that towards the end. One of the things that we do is we work to quantify what the economic impact is of aviation in Colorado. And I was really excited. These numbers get used all over the place. I was at a little get together. Yesterday was Southwest Airlines' 15th anniversary of their start of service in Denver. They had a little function downtown. They used our numbers to talk about the impact of aviation at that event. The governor quoted the numbers, and so the mayor of Denver. They were both there. It was pretty cool. So in Colorado, airports generate almost $49 billion of output, create almost 345,000 jobs with a payroll of over 16.2 billion. Aviation is a huge economic engine in the state, and that is recognized from the governor on down. People really know this, and we work very hard to put together this report. As we do this for the entire state, if you're interested, you can go to our website, colorado-aeronautics.org. We also do individual airport economic impact reports for every one of those 66 airports in the state. So if you're curious about what your airport's numbers are, you can go and find that specific for that particular airport. And that's all up. We did it in 2020. It was based on 2018 data because it takes a while to collect and calculate all that out. But it was basically up almost a third statewide since 2013. And we'll look forward to updating that report again in 2022 or 23. So you may have all seen this slide before. This is how we do what we do. So again, we don't get any federal money. We don't get stimulus money. We don't get regular funding from the FAA. We do not get any general fund money from the state. I don't get any money from CDOT. The only thing that funds what we do at the Division of Aeronautics is state aviation fuel tax. There's 3 of them in Colorado. Constitutionally, every penny of that revenue has to go for aviation purposes. We're one of the few states that has that protection. So again, if you ever see Governor Romer, he's still out there. Thank him. He was the one that made sure that that got put in the Constitution. It's a lot harder to change the Constitution than it is state law. So that's a really good protection that we have. So the biggest one is the sales tax on all jet fuel. The standard 2.9 sales tax in Colorado applies to jet fuel. Colorado is one of probably only 3 or 4 states in the country where the airlines are not exempt from paying state aviation fuel tax. So you can probably figure out which airport generates most of that 93%. And that's Denver International. The challenge that we have and the benefit that we have is that because that's a sales tax based on the price of a commodity as well as the volume, as the price goes up, our revenue goes up, just as if you sell more fuel that goes up. So one of the challenges we have is not only do we have to predict how much of this is going to get sold, but we have to try to predict the price at which it's going to get sold so we don't overextend ourselves. I always laugh, if you could accurately predict the price of oil into the future, you wouldn't be here. You'd be wealthy and doing something else. So that's a big challenge for us. We also have a 4 cent per gallon excise tax on non-airline jet fuel. So if you fly your own private King Air, you pay the sales tax plus an excise tax. And then if most of us fly in piston engine aircraft, we pay 6 cents a gallon. So you kind of see how that breaks down. Avgas is a very, very small part of that. I'll talk a little bit about electric airplanes later. From a money standpoint, we're not really worried about the impact of airplanes converting to electricity, because even if every single one of us was flying an electric GA airplane today, we'd only lose about $180,000 a year. It's not that much money. It's the premise of paying for your fair share. But anyway, so if you take all of those in a normal year, it's about $34 million of revenue. Everybody knows in March of 2020, people quit flying because COVID hit. Airlines dialed back flights. You all saw the pictures of the airplanes parked at Denver on the runway. Our revenue went almost in half, more than in half, to $14.5 million. Now, amazingly enough, that really didn't have as big of an impact on us as the division as you might think, because the way our money goes back out the door, state law provides that we turn roughly two thirds is the formula to it, but it works out to be about 67% of all of that revenue goes back to the airport where the fuel was sold. And then the airport can use that to do whatever they want. They can pay salaries, plow snow, keep the lights on, as long as they use it on the airport. So it's no secret, most of our money comes from Denver International. Almost all of that 67%, the vast majority of it goes to airports that sell the most fuel, and Denver International gets the biggest disbursements from us every month. So when our revenue went down, the checks back to the airport went down because they weren't selling as much fuel. Now, what we had to do is we had to make some adjustments to our 30%. And this is the really cool part. The 30% is the discretionary piece that under state law, our board has really broad discretion to do a lot of cool stuff with. It's not very specific. And because of that, we've been able to do some really innovative things that my counterparts around the country, they look at us and go, how the hell do you get to do that? That's really cool. And then we're very, very lean. As I mentioned, there's only 8 of us. We're about to add a 9th position that will do education and outreach. One of the things that our division funds, I'll talk a little bit about it later when we have the money, is we do education grant funding. In fact, the only grant under that program we've given in 6 years is the CPA. We gave y'all $5,000 a couple of years ago to buy your Redbird flight simulator. Those are the kinds of things that we're going to look forward to doing more. We actually had $500,000 in grants programs when COVID hit. we pulled that off the table because we just knew we were going to have reduced revenues. And so we had to put that back. But hopefully that comes back next year. And we're very lean. We only run at about 3% of admin. That's our building, our offices out at Front Range Airport, our staff and all that. So last year, unfortunately, because our funding went way down, instead of being able to issue our normal set of airport grants totaling about $8 to $9 million, we only issued $2.86 million in grants last year because we didn't have the money to do it. So we postponed a lot of airport projects. One that we had to postpone is Creed. I mentioned Creed before. That's a non-federal airport. The FAA does not assist with them. We have a $3 million grant in our program to repave the runway at Creed. That was supposed to happen next year. It's probably not going to happen until 24 or 25 now, unless we can find some other funding. So we're going to keep moving forward. The good news is what we always try to do is leverage FAA money and those 49 airports in Colorado, not including Denver, so 48, because we don't really work with Denver's funding. They're such a large animal. We just really don't engage with them. In a normal year, you'd see about $70 million of federal money come to Colorado for those 49 airports. What our division will do is when that federal money comes to your airport, you have to pay 10%. Feds pay 90, you got to pay 10. We'll pay half of your 10% on a federal match because we want to make sure airports don't lose out on federal money because the leverage there is just huge. So on a normal year, when we're doing we'll do an $8 million grant program here this coming January, amazingly enough, only about 25% of that goes to the federal match. Our board and our division is absolutely passionate about supporting the airports that don't get federal money. So the smaller GA airports actually will get about 75% of our grant funds on a normal year, not the commercial service airports. Exactly opposite of what I just said the feds do. So our board is very, very focused on helping GA airports stay. Well, $8.4 million isn't a lot of money. CDOT's entire budget is about $2 billion a year. So it doesn't go very far, unfortunately. But when we invest that money, we just don't go out there and say, oh yeah, we're going to repave your runway and build you a fuel farm. We actually have a plan. It's a very comprehensive plan. We just updated it in 2020. And one of the challenges we have is we obviously don't have enough money for all of the needs in the state. We have to prioritize. We have to figure out which airports need it the most, which ones do the community support. And so we have a plan that really helps us do that. And when we look at our system plan and making sure that to the extent we can, the whole system is really good. We look at safety and efficiency. That's obviously number one, anything we do in aviation. Access and mobility. I mean, there's a reason you get overnight air freight in Trinidad, and that's because a little Cessna Caravan flies from Denver to Trinidad every day with a bunch of FedEx freight. How do we make sure that those airports can support that? Making sure they're economically sustainable. One of the things that we've seen with the COVID trend is that a lot of people don't want to live in big cities anymore. They want to live somewhere else. Well, when they live in other places that are remote, they want to have good access to the rest of the world. And how do we facilitate that with our plan? And then making sure that our airport is fiscally responsible and sustainable. I mean, when people think of sustainability these days, it's all environmental, but finance is a big part of that as well. And so we look at that. So one of the things that we're also tasked with under state law is promoting aviation education. And I know this is where we've worked with CPA on a lot of things like mountain flying and Jeff, your work with the simulator. But one of the things we do is we help fund airport internships to get new folks into the workforce and get them. I mean, when I was going to college, I wanted to be a pilot. It was in the late 80s. Turned out it was a really crappy time to go be an airline pilot. I wasn't going to go spend all my money trying to learn how to fly and build time. So I ended up doing an internship at Centennial Airport and fell in love with the airport management world. Spent 7 years at Centennial and then moved around to some different airports. In fact, of the 8 of us on our staff, 5 of us started as interns at Centennial. If you can believe that. It's a pretty cool program. So right now we're funding internships at 8 airports in Colorado. And right now you can look all across the country and see people working in airports, at cargo companies, at airlines that started as careers here. So we'll help airports pay for that. You guys have all seen these. I didn't bring any with me. I'm sorry. We got stuck with a ton of these last year because we ordered before COVID. And nobody was picking them up. So we spent a lot of money and we've got a lot. If anybody needs any for schools, if you guys need some 2020 airport directories, if you need any programs, we've got a ton of them left over. So this year, not really knowing what we were going to get, we didn't order as many. I'll spare you the detail, but we try to order them in bulk. The airport directory costs us about $10 a piece and the chart's about $4. And it really goes up exponentially if your order is a lot smaller. So we didn't order as many this year. The good news is January, we'll have a new chart. We do the chart every 2 years. We do the directory every year. So if you do need them, we have a few, just let me know, drop your name. I'll mail them to you for free. But again, I think you all hopefully like these. One of the things we're going to look at is trying to do a statewide app with the airport directory in an app for your phone. Idaho's got one. A couple of states do that. We're going to look, this new position we're going to hire is going to help us try to figure that out. So we'd love to work with you all and see what kind of functionality you would like in an airport app specific for Colorado, if that's something that you're all interested in. Again, aviation safety, one of the cool programs we do. You all may not know about it. We actually have a contract with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We pay them a significant amount of money every year, and any airport in the state that's eligible for our funding, any one of those 66, if they're having an issue with wildlife on their airport for no cost, they can call one of the certified wildlife biologists. Unfortunately, these two ladies have both gotten promoted and are not in the state anymore, but they can get help with wildlife issues at no cost. So we can help keep airports safe, take care of wildlife issues, and they also have the ability to take an animal if they need to and do it in compliance with law, which is pretty complicated on some of the species that we have on airports. The other very cool program we have, I think it's the one that we get the absolute most bang for the buck in, is our surplus airport equipment program. And I always love this. As an airport manager, I bought a lot of these big snow plows, these big blowers you see here. Those are about $700,000 new. And if your little GA airport gets $150,000 a year of federal money, you're not going to spend that money on one piece of equipment. But they're really important. They're really key to keeping your airport safe. Well, we have a fantastic partnership with Denver International. And every year they make the cream of their used equipment available. It's not an auction, it's a sale. They set the price. People can come out and look at it. And then we can recycle this equipment to other airports in Colorado. We will pay for 80% of the purchase price of this used equipment from Denver. So I'll give you an example. About 4 years ago, they sold one of these $700,000 plows. Certainly had used its useful life at Denver, but for a Granby or a Kremling or something like that, it's great. You know, it really works well. They'd sell that for $40,000. We would pay for 80% of that. So for $8,000, one of these small GA airports could get a piece of equipment they would never get. We love this program. Denver is great about not giving us lemons because they know it's going to other airports. So they pick out the good ones. And it's not just big snow removal equipment. We get little sweepers, we get, little pickup trucks, we get fuelers, we've had de-icing equipment. So, and now since then, we've actually had 3 other airports, Colorado Springs, Rocky Mountain Metro, and Hayden have all kicked in some of their used equipment into the program too. So this is great. Unfortunately, again, because of the pandemic, Denver didn't do a sale this year. They kept all their stuff. So we didn't get to do one this year, but we will next year. But it's a great program. In fact, if you leave here, you'll see some of our equipment, this old faded yellow stuff. You can't miss it. You'll see it at Granby. There's, Granby's got theirs sitting outside. Fort Morgan's got some. Anyway, great program. I know you're all familiar with this. I know certainly Bill is our mountain automated, our AWAS system. Back in the year 2000, we realized that aviation folks needed some good weather in the high country. We're the only state that does this. We own and operate 13 AWAS units at Dakota Hill. That's our newest one that we did about 4 years ago. That's over by Rollins Pass, Corona, Wolf Creek. And then the one you see there with the snowcat, that's our AWAS unit on Berthoud Pass. It's driving over Berthoud Pass, you look up to the right, that's where ours is. It's the highest certified aviation weather station in North America, by the way, just under 13,000 MSL. And I know you all know this. One of the things we always got asked for was, well, the METAR is great, but it would really be cool to have cameras up there. And, cameras are easy. Cameras aren't complicated. What's hard is how do you get the data into a format that people can use and it's accessible and that it's functional. Well, for years and years, and there's our system of our current AWAS units right now. We have 13. We're actually, before I talk about cameras, we're actually working right now. I do have a supplemental request into the Capital Development Committee, the legislator, to put in a mountain AWAS unit either out along I-70 towards Lyman or out I-76 towards Fort Morgan. In our system plan, we got a lot of feedback from helicopter EMS operators that there's a really big gap in aviation weather when they're trying to get out to do something out here. And they would love to see some weather out there. So we may look at putting one of our AWAS units, not on an airport, but out there somewhere. But anyway, we got asked about cameras, and for years, the FAA's folks up in Alaska had a really robust network of aviation weather cameras. Everywhere you see a dot is a weather camera. Obviously, Alaska is a super challenging place to fly. This map also shows the cameras that Canada's version of the FAA did as well. This is my story. I love it. Look at this. Look at all those dots. That's not Wyoming, by the way. So it was really cool. And this kind of speaks to how flexible we can be. So it was in early 2019, the director of the FAA's weather camera system was down here in Boulder for a seminar. I met him through one of my previous AOPA colleagues in Alaska. And he said, the FAA is finally ready to do cameras outside of Alaska. And I said, we want to be the first. 14 months later, we had cameras in Colorado. 14 months from that conversation to the time the cameras were installed, we had them in. And what we actually did is we paid the FAA's Alaska team to put those in for us. We wrote a check for $226,000. The FAA folks came down from Anchorage. They spent 2 weeks here. They put them all up on our Mount Mawas units and went home. Unbelievable. They did them all in 2 weeks. So that led to, well, now we would like to put them in a couple of airports. So earlier this year, we did another phase with them. We put them at 10 airports, Telluride, Eagle. We picked some of the more challenging mountain airports. That happened in June of this year. They're now up and running. And then we just had a conversation with Bill. Next year in June, they're coming back down again. We're going to do 20 more airports. And so all of this is because we had the funding and our board is very forward thinking. So I don't know if you've seen these. It's weathercams.faa.gov. These are all hosted on the FAA's website. They're hosting this at no cost for us. They're helping us do the remote monitoring. There's a camera that's out. This happens to be the one on our AWOS unit at Sunlight outside of Glenwood Springs. And if you haven't seen it, it shows a clear day view here with a couple of identifier landmarks, distance and altitude. And then it shows you what it looks like today. And then below you can see the 4 different views that you see the arrows up there. It's not video because they're all on cell phones. So the bandwidth doesn't exist for video, but they are updated every 6 minutes. You can loop them back. And you also get on that weathercams. Has anybody gone to that website? It's way more than just cameras. You can get METARs and TAFs and PIREPs and NOTAMs, and it's got trend bars. It is really a very, very cool product that, you know, Nelson, you guys just keep adding more stuff to it. Every time I go on there, there's a different thing to it. So that's that. If you haven't used them, they're very, very cool. We're working through some bugs with some of them, but again, by this time next year, we'll have 43 sites with these cameras here in Colorado, just 3 years after we started it. So we're pretty proud of that. And for less than $700,000 total. So not a lot of money, which is cool. So I want to talk a little bit about the future. I'm not going to read all this. Our division has a strategic plan to kind of help us focus what we're going to work on. Because again, we don't have all the money to do what we want to do. We don't have all the people and time. So how do we figure out what we're going to work on? Well, one of the things that's coming down the pike is emerging technologies. And this is going to happen way sooner than later. You know, I just love this. For the last 120 years, aviation has been powered by fossil fuel, jet fuel or avgas. That's it, with a few exceptions, experiments. But things are changing fast, and we want to make sure that our airports here in Colorado are ready for what's coming down the pike. I think everybody is familiar with By Aerospace down at Centennial. They're developing their 2-seat electric E-flyer. You know, to Brad's point earlier about noise, I think when you see these in the fleet and they don't burn leaded fuel and they're quiet and they cost a fraction of what it costs to rent a 172 today, it makes flight training better. You're going to really spur new pilots. You're going to make the neighbors happy. Problem is you got to plug those in. And the problem is they take a hell of a lot more power than a Tesla. So who's going to pay for that? And how do you get those charging stations? How do you get 20 of them at an Aspen Flying Club on the ramp? And where do you get the power to do that? And who's going to pay for it? And how do you recoup that? We've got to figure that out for Colorado's airports. And we want to lead the way on that. What I get really excited about and what our board is really excited about are these kinds of airplanes. And we've all seen the Eve vertical takeoff and landing, the little Jetsons cars that all these folks are developing, these 4-seat, you know, they're going to come pick you up at your house and take you downtown. Okay, we'll talk about that later. What we really want to do is we want to find a way here in Colorado, and I say we, it's the board and division. How do we enable our airports to support these new airplanes that are coming down the pike? So the one on the left Y'all recognize that as a Cessna Caravan, but it doesn't have a PT6 in the front anymore. It's got a 650 horsepower electric motor that gives that airplane about 300 miles of range with 9 people on it today. You can fly from Denver to any point in Colorado in 350 miles. Maybe not with that because it's not pressurized. But that airplane's flying today. And I think you're going to see a lot of those coming down the road. You know the magic behind 9 seats? There's some magic behind 9 seats. When you have less than 10 seats as a rule, you don't have to have TSA. You don't have to be a certificated airport like in Aspen or Gunnison. You don't have to have the firefighting and all of that. That's the threshold for that. So all of a sudden now, without all of those costs and without the cost of fuel, these airplanes are going to enable really effective and efficient and cost-effective travel between places that doesn't exist today. And I always use Lamar. There's a reason United Airlines doesn't fly to Lamar, because the smallest airplane they have is 50 seats, and there's not enough business to go back and forth from Lamar with a 50-seat airplane at a price that you would pay, that a reasonable mortal would pay. That's going to change with all of this. The Alice down below is going to start test flying here right after the first of the year. 440 nautical miles, 250 knots, 9 seats, and that's the only one that's pressurized. So that's going to be one that here in Colorado you'd be able to see going to Aspen and going to some of these other places like that. So how do we support this? The challenge with these 2 airplanes, if you want to charge them fast enough that your airplane's not sitting on the ground for 3 hours, because airlines know if your airplane's sitting, it's not making money. You need between 3 and 5 megawatts of power. Sound like guy from Back to the Future. 1 megawatt powers 1,000 homes for a day, to give you an idea how much power that is. We got to figure out how to get that kind of power to airports so that when these airplanes are here, we've got a home for them to fly. Can't be all of them. Communities might not even have that many, but we're really excited about what this will mean for general aviation airports and how we can use all of those existing airports that we're already paying for to help people move around the state better, cleaner, faster, and cheaper. So we're excited. We're really excited about that. They don't really quite know yet. It really depends on the power source. If you have 3 or 4 megawatts, it's about 20 minutes. It's really no faster or no slower than it would be to fuel it. One of the cool things they're looking at is actually a battery fuel truck, where you would have a really high capacity battery on a big like fuel truck. You would charge that at night when electricity is cheaper, and you would be able to develop the battery technology that even if you didn't have continuous power, you would be able to charge the truck slowly and then like supercharge the airplanes with the truck. That's one of the things that the National Renewable Energy Lab right here in Colorado is working on. This one is really cool. This airplane's about ready to start flying. You may recognize that. It's a de Havilland -8. It's a 37-passenger regional turboprop. It's been flying for 35 years or so. A company called Universal Hydrogen is developing a version of this that runs on a hydrogen fuel cell that creates electricity to run 2 giant electric motors here. So it doesn't use batteries. And then what you do with these is you already have these cells ready to go, and you just load them in the back of the airplane and away you go. That's being developed. That airplane's going to start flying. Airbus is developing one of these too. So these are not pie in the sky ideas. These are things you're going to see flying in the next little bit. Maybe they don't all make it to market, but that's going to also fundamentally change aviation's future here. And here's the challenge. If you've been watching the news, the aviation industry, the airlines, NBAA, manufacturers have said, look, if we don't solve the greenhouse gas issue with aviation, we're not going to exist. Aviation worldwide is only about 2.5% of greenhouse gas emissions, but it's the fastest growing sector because aviation is growing so fast. So if aviation doesn't figure out a way to make itself less impactful, it's going to be a problem. United, American, Southwest, Delta, all of the major airlines have said, we want to figure out a way to be carbon neutral by 2050 so that we can continue to fly. And that's going to happen on the jet fuel side with sustainable aviation fuel. In our lifetime, the battery technology will never exist that you'll be able to fly a 737 size airplane. That just doesn't happen. That's all you'll fly is a battery with no people. So that doesn't make any money. But with sustainable aviation fuel, you basically brew jet fuel from waste products, forest waste, ag waste, municipal waste, cooking oil, all those kinds of things. It's being produced today. It's certified for use in aircraft today at up to 50-50 mix with regular jet fuel. Airlines are using it. Problem is today is because it's manufactured in the United States every year, it's about 20 billion gallons of jet fuel is what's consumed in the US. only 4.5 million gallons of capacity exists today for sustainable aviation fuel. It's just a teeny bit of it. So, but this is what the airlines and what everybody is trying to work on is how do we make this more available? How do we get the price down? Right now it's available at 2 airports in Colorado, Telluride and Aspen, and it's about 3 to 5 times the price of a regular gallon of jet fuel. So you really got to be vested in doing the right thing now if you want to do that. People are. Kenny, the airport director in Telluride, says he has more demand for sustainable aviation fuel at the higher price than he can serve. So this is going to be the future for the larger aircraft coming down the pike. It's sustainable aviation fuel. So you're going to see a lot of talk about this. And the cool thing is because those waste products have already had their climate impact and their carbon, you can have this be almost an 80% net reduction in a gallon of fuel as opposed to traditional jet fuel. Here's some recent headlines just from the last couple of weeks. American Airlines spends $100 million into Bill Gates's SAF program. Business aviation leaders at MBAA last month said we're going to commit to net zero by 2050. United and Honeywell are building a program on how they can produce more jet fuel. So this is really cool. I love this because it's taxed exactly the same as regular fuel. So we still get all of our money. So this is why I get excited about sustainable aviation fuel. So you're going to really hear a lot about this. Stay tuned. It's really cool stuff. And then here's just kind of a little chart I love. It shows from commuter 9 to 50 seats to long haul, what technology is likely to power those aircraft over the next 30 years. And you can see that really for the most part, sustainable aviation fuel is the answer for most all of the larger aircraft. But we get excited about that. And again, the cool thing with that is it doesn't require separate tanks, doesn't require separate infrastructure. You don't have to do anything to your engine like you do with avgas and unleaded and all that. It's a drop-in fuel. It drops right in with traditional jet fuel. So with that, just talking a little bit about technology, I know near and dear to Marty Brophy's heart, our project up there at FNL to work on our remote tower project. I know you're all familiar with the technology there. That project has really languished since COVID. March 14th was the date that CDOT got sent home, basically. So that's the date I go off. The week before was the week that we turned on the temporary tower at FNL, because the way it was supposed to work, we brought in a tower on a trailer. If you've been up there, it's a little camper. It's got a tower in it. What was supposed to happen was they were going to start controlling traffic from that while other controllers followed along and worked out the bugs in the remote tower room. Well, nobody got to travel when COVID hit, and the FAA is still not allowed to travel. And all of the folks that needed to be here to do our testing live in Washington, D.C. That's where their headquarters are. So, and unfortunately for us, Larimer County has not been in the best COVID situation lately. So that's made the FAA even more reticent to travel. So basically, we have really made no progress since March of 2020. It's really frustrating. It's not my fault. It's not the airport's fault. It's really not even the FAA's fault. They don't seem to be as excited about moving this fast as we are, but we're going to work on that. We're having conversations with Senator Hickenlooper about how we can kick the FAA in the ass a little bit to get them to want to be more engaged with this. But we're going to keep at it. Because of this, Avelo Airlines has started flying into FNL. That's going to mean more money for the airport, better service for the community up there, but we're going to keep at it. And hopefully we'll be able to get into this next phase of testing here around the first of the year, if everything keeps trending the way it's trending. So stay tuned. Jason Lacone, the airport director up there, I work with him more than any of the other airport directors in the state. He pointed out to me over a beer the other day that between the time that Alan Shepard took his 15-minute suborbital flight to the time Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, took less time than we are here on this project. I'm like, yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah. So, and we're still not close. We still probably have a couple of years. The good news is for us, the other project here in the United States, remote tower-wise, was at Leesburg, Virginia, and outside of Washington, D.C. They got their operational approval a couple of weeks ago. And so that's going to free up a lot of FAA attention, I think, for our project. So theirs moved forward, and now ours is the only one left in the U.S. right now. So that's really it. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk with you all. One of the things that I'll tell you that we are working on, and I know Eric Wilkins from CABA is back here. Colorado is really lucky. I'm lucky. In Montana, there are 2 different airport associations because the GA airports and the commercial service airports don't get along. And they're always at competing needs. We don't have that issue here in Colorado. CABA, CPA, Colorado Airport Operators Association, CAOA, everybody's generally on the same page. We're talking to each other about legislative stuff. We're talking to each other about funding. One of the things that we're going to try to come to all of you with, just a heads up, including CABA and CAOA, a lot of states do it, is a statewide aviation conference. You all have your annual meeting, CABA has their annual meeting, airports do, but nobody really does it together. Our division would love to take the lead on maybe every couple of years facilitating a 2 or 3 day conference where all of us get in the same room. You all still do your own business at some point. But we get everybody together. There's also a very active aerial agriculture association. They kind of tend to do their own thing. They like to fly under the radar, so to speak. But they're doing a lot of legislative things as well and very engaged. So keep that in the back of your mind. We'd love to talk to you about getting everybody together. Montana does a fantastic one. Has anybody ever been to the Montana Aviation Conference? I don't know why they hold it in the dead of February, usually in places like Butte, but they do a great one. Utah's going to start doing one. North Dakota's been doing one forever. So keep that in mind, Marty. We're going to reach out to you about how we might put that together and get everybody to do that. So just a couple of legislative things coming down the pike. I don't know if y'all saw, but Gary, to your follow up on legislative issues. Last month, there was a Flight for Life helicopter that took a laser strike down in Douglas County. It was really bad. It injured one of the pilot's eyes, maybe permanently. Colorado does not have any state penalties for that. And so CABA is kind of taking the lead with Centennial Airport, who really stood up and said, we need to probably have a law in Colorado that makes that illegal. So we're going to support that. I know CABA is engaged with that. We've got some legislators willing to support that. So you may see us coming to CPA and saying, hey, at the appropriate time, it might be good to weigh in with a letter to the committee folks about that. That's really about all that we're seeing. I will remind you, we do have a House General Aviation Caucus here in Colorado. It's chaired by Representative Hugh McKeon, who is the Republican from Loveland. He's not a pilot, but he loves the airport. And then the other one is Alex Valdez from Denver. He's a Democrat, so it's bipartisan. He's an Embry-Riddle grad, is a pilot, not active, but also he doesn't even have an airport in his district. He's in the heart of Denver. But last year they stood up a GA caucus, and CABA and I have gone and briefed them on what's going on. We had like 16 legislators show up a couple months ago for that. But anyway, that's going to be a group that as we talk about legislative issues, we're going to have inroads into the state house because we've got folks now that are really interested. So kudos to CABA. You all took the lead on really standing that up, Eric, and we appreciate that. So it's all good. A lot of money coming to the state. We'll see how it goes from airports, but keep flying because your fuel helps us pay for all this stuff. So that's it. That's all I had. I don't have any more scintillating pictures. I'm sorry, but I really appreciate the chance to come and share with what we're up to. And again, we couldn't do it with all of you. And, we're out at Front Range Airport. We're not out there regularly right now, but if you're ever there, you can taxi right up to the back of our office. I know Walt's done it. We're right across from Walt's hangar. We'll give you charts and directories. If you give us a heads up, you're coming, we'll load you up, get a photo op and do that. But Yep. So I don't understand a whole lot about that. I think one of the things that I'm not clear on, and maybe somebody else is whether that has to have its own separate fuel farm, fuel tanks, fuel trucks, or if it can be blended with low lead. I don't know. That's one of the conversations we're having. We'd love to see it in Colorado because you don't have to be a genius to realize lead's not good for you. So I think they can in the airplane is what I've read, but I'm not sure on the distribution side. And that's always where it gets a little catchy is does it have to be stored and trucked differently? So I don't know. Is anybody using that? I don't think it's available in Colorado right now, unless somebody could correct me. Anybody have an airplane? Right. Yep. I don't think so. Yep. Unless you want to do it yourself. And here's the challenge, again, as a former airport director, y'all are business people to some degree, even if it's your own home finances, you've got to have a business case to make that available. And if you're never going to sell enough of it to turn a profit or even pay for your infrastructure, it's going to be hard for airports to want to invest in it. So that's where we may come in and say, hey, if a busy airport wants to put it in, maybe we'll talk about helping them fund it. We are able to fund fuel farms to do our part. But I think, that's going to be the challenge. I think where you'll see it first is probably at the airports that own FBOs. So like Telluride, the airport actually owns the FBO. Air and Spaceport, Adams County owns the FBO. We have a couple of airports like that around the state. They might be in a better place to do that because they've got deeper pockets maybe than some other airports where they don't own the FBO. Yes, sir. That's a great question. It was, do we have a passport program? We started to do one with A.A.E. We're going to resume that with our new person coming on board. So yes, we are going to stand up a passport program. It's probably going to be part of the app we want to do with the airport directory and do it electronically rather than with a paper thing like some states do, just because a lot of our airports aren't attended. But yeah, we've been asked for that a long time. We're going to do it. We're going to try to figure out a way to pay for prizes. State procurement rules are always weird. We got to be careful what we buy. We're not allowed to buy certain stuff, but we would love to put together a passport program. And that's going to be one of the first assignments of our new person. In fact, that was actually one of the things that was in our last strategic plan, was specifically to put that up. So thank you. Great question. Yeah, Bart. I don't know the answer to that. I think it's solid waste, as I understand it. So the stuff that would be going in the landfill that then decays. I'm learning about it too. It's really amazing. I don't get the science behind it. It's crazy. There's also a way to make it chemically without stuff. That's not as beneficially environmentally, but you can make it using other chemicals too. And right now it's really frustrating because in Colorado, Telluride and Aspen, their sustainable aviation fuel comes by tanker truck from either Texas or California. That's the only two places in the United States where it's made today. So if you're trucking sustainable fuel, 2,000 miles to get it here instead of by pipeline from Houston, kind of offsets the benefit a little bit. So I think one of the things we're going to work on is, well, is there an opportunity somewhere closer in Nebraska or Kansas, maybe Eastern Colorado, where there's a lot of ag. There was an op-ed piece in the Coloradan yesterday by the vice president of the Colorado Farmers Association saying Colorado farmers are ready to step up and help make this stuff, which I thought was really cool. Trying to do it in a way that doesn't take away from food sources. They're very careful to say it's non-food produce. And maybe they get away from quit making ethanol and ruining my gas mileage. They can use that stuff to make sustainable aviation fuel instead. Yes, sir. Right. So that's a great question. So I would say within the next 3 to 5 years is when they'll be in broad use. The challenge that I think that we're going to have is trying to decide who's going to pay for it. And like, if it's you, do you have it in your hangar? How do you pay for it? Who's going to get it there? Is it the airport? How are you going to pay for that? I think that's the biggest thing with the electric right now. So one of the things that our board did approve back in August is $200,000 for us to do a study to look at what that might mean in Colorado, which airports should be first, what would their needs be, what's the gap between what exists today and what that need would be, how do we close that? I mentioned the National Renewable Energy Lab, Nrel, over here in Golden. They have an entire team doing nothing but airport electrification. In fact, they just released a really cool paper a couple of weeks ago about that. We're going to partner with Nrel because they're way smarter about that. And you know who else is doing this? It's NASA. So NASA, their Advanced Research Mission Directorate, ARMD, they just did an entire model in the mid-Atlantic states about what air service would look like with a 9-seat electric airplane. And obviously that's a great place to start because everything is so close together and it's there are a lot of people, but they modeled where's the inflection point where you would fly instead of drive. I mean, they did all the statistical stuff that's really cool. We want to maybe look at that in Colorado because we can't afford to electrify all 76 airports at once. And it wouldn't make sense to do that. There's a reason not all of our airports have fuel, for instance. But we want to help be ready to have those kind of, we can't pay for it, but we can help maybe spur the discussion about how that happens in Colorado. Yes, sir. Yeah. Right. Yep. We are, Carl, that's exactly right. We are going to keep track of that. Are we keeping track of what's happening with the NASA stuff? And yes, in fact, we originally had this study budgeted last year, but when COVID hit, we pulled back our education grants. We decided to shelve that study. That was really beneficial because since then, that NASA study has come out. Georgia Institute of Technology did an amazing analysis of that. Nrel's done some new work. And then the cool thing is because we're going to be able to partner with Nrel directly, they'll be able to add resources. We'll get more than $200,000 worth of work rather than if we just shopped it out to a private consultant. So we're really excited about about what that means. I'm always a little skeptical of new technology. And those of us in the airport world remember back in the early 2000s, these things called very light jets. Anybody remember that? Well, I know Walt remembers those. They were going to fundamentally darken the skies and change the way airports had to operate. And we all had to do new master plans at our airports that addressed very light jets, these 4 or 5 seat airplanes that were just going to change the way people moved. And that was the Eclipse was the one that really did that. We all know what happened to them. Never happened. It just, well, again, it wasn't economically feasible because they were expensive to operate. They were expensive to buy. They burned a ton of fuel, and you could divide those costs only over 4 or 5 seats. There's a reason the airlines don't fly 19-seat aircraft anymore. Doesn't make money. But again, little towns don't need 50 seats, and you're not going to fly to a city 1 time a day. 1, that's no good if you want to fly. You need frequency. And 2, it doesn't make any sense to have all the fixed costs at that city. If you're only doing 1 flight a day, you've got to have people and fuelers and place and rent. And anyway, so it's the airline industry is really fascinating. But again, I think the electric aircraft, when you take fuel, which we all know is the biggest single variable cost in operating any aircraft, Cessna or otherwise, take that out of the equation and make it electrical. You're going to see, like they modeled out there, some places where all of a sudden you might see scheduled air service between rural Colorado, especially if there's demand with people living in different places with COVID. They don't all want to live here in Denver. So anyway, we're excited about it. Thank you so much for trying to pay attention to the future. And yeah, thanks.
Guess I should just hold it like that. That was the last item on our agenda, I believe. So I would move that we are done. And thank you all for coming. I think at least a few of us are probably going to go to Brothers Barbecue for a little lunch. If anybody wants to come along, we'll just descend on them like a ravaging horde and see what happens. Okay, so thank you all for coming, and we'll see you at our next meeting, I guess.